Welcome to the DRS Train podcast, Abu Dhabi 2021 edition. This service will be stopping at that scrappy first lap, the Mexican Minister of Defense, backmarker woes, Tsunoda's Day of Days, Latifi's divine intervention, Massey effect, and Verstappen, the worthy champion. I'm Peter Brook, and I'm joined today by Nav F1 and PsychedeliCon. Welcome, guys.
Hey there.
Hi, looking forward to covering this classic race.
Yes, indeed. This is a race that, well, I think basically everyone remembers. It's kind of hard to forget. Going into it, I just remember basically being nervous for an entire week before because we'd had the week before it we'd had Jeddah, and that itself was a pretty tumultuous race. It did seem terribly convenient after everything that had happened that year that we go into this race and then Hamilton and Verstappen are tied on points. I couldn't quite believe that it got to that point.
Yeah, well, Jeddah, honestly, quickly on that, it must have been the most nonsensical race I had watched up to that point. Because I remember watching it at midnight where I was, and nothing made sense. I couldn't believe what was going on with the Verstappen, Hamilton, slowing down, brake checking, letting the other one go by. And after that race, I just knew that Abu Dhabi would also cause some controversy because Jeddah 21, I think, has been eclipsed by Abu Dhabi in how chaotic and nonsensical it was. I had never seen a race like this, at least in my last 12 or 13 years of watching F1. And it perfectly set the tone for what we would see in Abu Dhabi. Those last two races were just utter nonsense, to me at least.
They were a really tense conclusion to a very tense season with all those moments in Silverstone and the tire blowout in Baku that cost Verstappen dearly, and Monza, of course, the controversial overtake, or if you can call it that, in Brazil defense, where they both went way off track. There was a whole new caliber of missing the apex, and it was always going to end up in fire, I suppose, at Abu Dhabi, especially with them coming in there on equal points. So, yeah.
Yeah, my view has always been that if 2021 had been a normal season, Max would have secured the title probably somewhere around Qatar, because he ultimately lost a lot more points than Hamilton did through all the controversies around penalties and everything else rather than just his own errors. It got to that point and you were just left thinking, well, I don't know what's going to happen, because Max had been the faster and stronger driver all year, but then these final 4 or 5 races, they'd put that new engine in Hamilton's car, which was just insanely powerful, and suddenly he couldn't touch him. And we saw the way he carved through the field in Sao Paulo, and he won very comfortably in Qatar. He was basically the faster driver in Jeddah, but the race had been so stop-start, and then Max had almost broken his gearbox with that, what was almost the lap of the century in qualifying, which ended up not mattering because there were so many restarts. And you just went into this thinking, I have no idea what's going to happen, because Abu Dhabi is not a race known for being particularly dramatic before this, because it had been the site of 3 title deciders before in 2010, 2014 and then 2016. But again, those races that nothing really happened. It was just tense because you were waiting. I mean, the 2014 one was written off quite early, but 2016 you had Hamilton backing Rosberg up to try and get the others to pass him, and 2010 there were 4 drivers in contention and you were waiting all race for Alonso to get past Petrov. And with this one you just didn't know how normal it would be. And I suppose one of the biggest things to factor in was that it was a new layout, because they took away the chicane at turn 4 or 5, and then also at the end around what was turn 11 at that time was now a sort of much more rounded, semi-banked kind of turning, and so that presented a better flow, but it also meant they were going into the unknown somewhat.
And potentially also cut down overtaking opportunities. I think those chicanes, I don't know, were they used much for overtaking before that? don't really recall, but chicanes tend to have these dive bombs present themselves for that, and
Very little in the first one. The second one, you would see quite a lot of overtaking there because it came off the back straight and you had the double DRS effect. But the first one, you hardly ever saw overtakes there other than maybe on the first lap because the setup into it isn't very good because you had turn one and then the flowing into it. But it did just kind of kill the rhythm, so it made sense to get rid of that and make it into a proper overtaking spot, which it is now, and which we saw it would be later in the race.
Yeah, and Red Bull, even though I think were the second fastest car overall in that season, they were still in it to win the constructors as well. They needed a miracle to win it, but I think it again reinforces my personal view, at least, that Verstappen had an incredible season that year. Because yes, he made a lot of mistakes. Yes, he made a few mistakes up to that point, but he made less mistakes than Lewis, I would say, because I don't think that car was just as fast as the Merc, and especially when the Merc put that new engine in, we really, really saw how fast that was. Sao Paulo, Peter mentioned it quickly, but Sao Paulo was incredible. It was just Lewis playing on 0% AI. It was that easy for him. So yeah, Red Bull was still in the race for um, first in constructors. Another thing that was going on was Alpine versus AlphaTauri for fifth. If anyone cared about that, I cared about it a bit because AlphaTauri was somehow really good in 21, not least thanks to Gasly's incredible quality performances. And Alonso also wanted to finish ahead of Ocon in the standings. So those were very minor talking points, unless you cared about those teams, because obviously Verstappen versus Hamilton was the main debate, and that was what we also saw in quali, where everyone thought that Lewis would get an easy pole position, but Verstappen just did an incredible lap as well.
Yeah, Verstappen, he did get pole by 3/10. He was forced to use an extra set of soft tires in order to get that because I think he'd locked up on one of his earlier pairs, or he'd locked up on the pair he was going to start the race on in Q2. But he did just about manage to get that pole, even though the whole weekend Lewis had been faster, and as we saw in the race, it was the faster car. But it all was kind of for naught at the end because he had such a bad start. But it showed he was still, maybe he could still clinch it on pace before we got to the race.
Yeah, on the subject of the Mercedes car just being so much faster towards the end of the season, we heard that the whole year in 2021, Mercedes were concerned about reliability issues. Bottas burned through 7 engines over that season, and Lewis Hamilton had took like I think 6 engines that year, and I don't think either of them ever had like an engine DNF even once, or I'm not even sure if any Mercedes customer teams did. Like Latifi dumpstered a bunch of them, but the others not to my knowledge. And but apparently they were really concerned about the reliability of that engine because Toto was talking about it all year. And yeah, Bottas those 7 engines, and they kept adding to that pool of engines and taking engine penalty after engine penalty, and yeah. What I think happened is that for the final part of the season, they just turned up the engine and switched it out a bit more often. And we know that the Mercedes engine probably lost more horsepower that the older it got than the Honda engine did. But
yeah, Lewis had an engine failure in FP2 at Zandvoort, but otherwise, I don't remember either of them having any kind of failures. It's difficult to say with the other Mercedes teams because I think there were a few. I know that since 2022, it seems like Ferrari engines have been stronger than Mercedes ones. But yeah, I was waiting because they obviously the car was running on such a high fuel map and everything else. I was waiting for it to blow up at some point. It just didn't really. But that's always been the case with Mercedes. I mean, Lewis has had only about 7 or 8 retirements since he joined Mercedes, and most of those have been accidents. He almost never has mechanical retirements. Like there's just reliability is just supreme across the board in the past few years. When it used to be, go back 30 years, and it was horrendously bad.
yeah,
But now they are, yeah, engine failures are extremely rare. and I guess that's what can make them more costly, because the way it went with them being tied on points is that Verstappen was ahead on countback. So if his engine had blown, then Verstappen is champion immediately.
True.
But if Verstappen's engine had blown, Lewis still needed to finish the race and get points in order to be champion.
Mm.
Which also adds on that point that some fans want Abu Dhabi 21 results to be cancelled. I'm not sure all of them realize that Verstappen is still champion if that happens.
Oh yeah, if the whole result gets cancelled. But if they only get Max disqualified, but I don't think I don't know how they would do that. I mean, there's
It's impossible. There's no reason to disqualify only Max. So
He didn't break the rules.
there is nothing they can do. Yeah, he raced. There's nothing he did. He was put in a situation where he had to make an overtake.
on the safety restart when they were crawling like side by side. He was ahead for a short moment. Maybe they can argue that or something. But they already did try that after the race to get Verstappen penalized for that, and they didn't manage to. But then again, they're trying to open all kinds of worms now. So
Yeah, well, that leads us to the start of the race where, well, Lewis had a bad start, and sorry, Max had a bad start, and Lewis took the lead of him. Verstappen, well, he took him back, and that started the first controversy of cutting the corner. And I just wanted to know, Con, what did you think of that when Verstappen dive bombed and Lewis reacted by just cutting the corner?
it's a tricky one because Verstappen was ahead by the apex, if I remember correctly, and well, he managed to keep on within the white lines with some of the tires, so like he wasn't off track in that particular occasion. But Lewis went way off track, so Max didn't leave Lewis the space, but then again, he was already entitled to that corner, and Lewis argued that he was pushed off, cut the whole corner, and then we actually get to the main controversy of that whole thing, because of course, in any other situation, it would have just been a clear Lewis give the place back to Max. He overtook you, and you went off the track, retained the position, gained an advantage. Not usual, but somehow all Lewis had to give back was the like time advantage that he gained, which was like I don't know, 3 seconds or something that he was ahead of Verstappen afterwards, and then he had to slow down a bit until Max was like within DRS range again or something. But of course, there was no DRS on the first lap, obviously. Didn't actually have to hand back the position, and I thought at the time that this was completely offensive, considering earlier treatment of drivers throughout the season and having to give back positions that were taken. Then again, you could argue that it was karma for Verstappen's maneuver on Hamilton in Brazil, where Verstappen didn't get a penalty. So, but then again, do we correct one wrong with another wrong? It's not. That's not how you right the wrongs.
I've never seen a case before of a driver being told to give back the time advantage, because that's quite subjective in terms of trying to convert distance into time to do it accurately. But it's always been you give the place back. But if they had done that, it would have been for naught anyway, because as soon as DRS was activated, Hamilton would have just passed him again. Because even though he was on the slower tyre, he was still faster throughout the entire race. And it was a very desperate move from Max anyway, because he locked up and nearly lost the car trying to pass him. But yeah, it wouldn't have made any difference. And obviously, with the way the race ended, it would have made no difference anyway. Like Max wasn't fast enough to win the race on pure pace.
Yeah, I also think there was no way Verstappen would have won on pure pace, and even if he completes that overtake, it's done anyway. I was also thinking, what was Max thinking at that point? Because surely he realizes that it's over for him in terms of winning on pure pace. So I don't think the aggressive move had any afterthoughts, but it must have been extremely frustrating to just mess up the start and be like, okay, this title is gone for now. It's not coming back. And that was what struck me during that first lap. It's that this incredible year that has amounted to an incredible title decider in Abu Dhabi might be done in lap one, and we don't see anything happen for the rest of the race, which seemed like it. I don't think that that time advantage penalty was a fair thing, but during the middle of the race, Sergio Perez decided to make things a bit more interesting, which was fantastic because, as I said, I thought nothing else would happen. But Perez decided to defend extremely well, especially between, I think, lap 20 and lap 28. And, well, that was just impressive, which also makes us think, yeah, well, what has happened to that Sergio who knew how to defend and knew how to fight?
Well, Paris didn't defend until lap 28. He pitted on lap 21. He spent 21 laps on the used soft tires and then went onto hards. And by that point, he was out of the way. So he would have been defending from like, I don't know, maybe lap 18 to lap 21 or something. I don't know how long that defense actually went, maybe like 2 laps or something. He wasn't backing up Lewis for long, but he was doing it very effectively. But yeah, on the subject of before, and while we haven't switched the slide yet, the whole thing with Verstappen, he would have just been pretty much desperate by that point to just try anything like we had seen in Brazil already. He knew he was an inferior machinery. He knew that winning the title by this point was already a long shot. Even that Hamilton, all Hamilton had to do was drive a clean race and he would have won already. And so that's what happened there. Would the race have unfolded differently had Lewis have had to give the position back at the start after that overtake from Max? Maybe it would have shifted everything a bit because, of course, in the end it came down to did Lewis have enough time to pit under a safety car and still come out in front of Max? And had they been able to safely do that, without any risk at all. They didn't. Ultimately, we know that they didn't do that at the end. But had they been able to do that, then perhaps the outcome would have been different because Lewis would have also been on fresh soft tires by the end. But this shifted the whole thing. It took Lewis longer to get the gap towards Max. It took longer for the gaps to build as they end up being built, and yeah, I don't know. It would have made a difference, probably not, but maybe.
Yeah, it would have meant there would have been he would have had a slightly smaller lead at the end, which would have still meant he couldn't have pitted and kept the lead in the safety car. He would have caught Checo slightly later when Checo was holding him up. I don't know how much difference that would have made. So yeah, it would have had a small difference, but not a huge amount. I think with Max in general, the only times he made mistakes that year, it was at the beginning of the year and at the end of the year when he didn't have the fastest car. And he was, I mean, we saw this in Bahrain, and then there was Estoril, and then again, Jeddah here, and Sao Paulo, all times when he didn't have the fastest car. And Hamilton was making his mistakes in the middle of the season when he didn't have the fastest car. That seemed to be the way it was with them. But with Checo, it was interesting because everyone was quite curious to see how he would pair up to Verstappen because he wasn't a rookie, unlike Gasly and Albon. And the first half of the season was quite disappointing because he would have poor starts and not gain places. But then he got into a bit of a rhythm because in Manicourt, he was a very good second driver and he was just he wasn't defending against them, but he was just there being in the way a bit and making them think on their feet with strategy. And then we started seeing these very good defensive moves. He did this in Turkey with Hamilton and almost got pushed into the pit lane. And then he did it again in Saudi. And then he does it again here. And it's some of the best defending you've ever seen, considering that he was still on old tyres. Hamilton had just left the pit lane. He was on brand new tyres. And Perez knew exactly where to place the car, exactly when to deploy the battery, and even would deliberately play DRS chicken to give himself DRS, surpass Lewis again. He just knew this is where he kind of makes up for maybe not being so good on race pace, is that he knows exactly he's a very good defensive driver.
Yeah, well, you said Estoril. I think you meant Portimao. That was wishful thinking.
Yes, yeah.
From you. Yeah. And yeah, on Checo, there was. So I saw the onboards with the team radios he was hearing, and it was just such an adequate use of the battery, as you said, the ERS. His engineer was giving him the information, but also Checo was very confident with what he was doing. And yeah, I think that word summed up Checo's defense that day. It was confidence. He knew what he was doing, and he was quite calm in doing it. It's something that he definitely lacks nowadays. He doesn't have that confidence to just be strategic with his things, which he became so famous for doing when he was back in Force India, getting those road podiums every season, basically. So yes, Max called him a legend, and I think every fan watching him at that point was saying, "Okay, yeah, Checo is a legend. He was earning that title he had of Minister of Defense." Now, why was that defense really useful in the grand scheme of things? Yes, because Lewis might have had a bigger lead at the end when the safety car happens. However, would that have still would that did that defense prevent him from pitting? I'm not sure. I don't know what you guys think about it. I'm not sure if Checo doesn't defend, um, that changes anything, but at least it changed something as a fan watching. That's for sure.
It cost Lewis about 10 seconds in 2 laps. So yeah, without it, Lewis, I think there would have been enough of a gap for him to pit at the end.
For sure.
So yeah, I think it
Was it
did
10
make enough.
seconds?
It was a lot because it was mostly on the second lap going under the hotel when he did just back off and weave a bit in the middle of the circuit. And that
right,
was when
yeah.
Lewis was like, "That's dangerous driving, man." That alone cost him 3 or 4 seconds. But you could see because the thing is, Verstappen caught up, and I think he just about got within DRS range of
Yeah.
Lewis, but then Lewis just stormed off anyway. So in the short term, it didn't really meet their objectives because it still didn't give Verstappen the chance to really attack him, and even if it did, Lewis was still faster.
I think at the start of that chase, Verstappen was like 10.8 seconds behind. I think he ended through Checo's defense. He ended up, I think, 1.3 seconds behind, so barely out of DRS range, and I don't think he ever got into DRS range at that point. I could be wrong, but yeah, without that whatever 9.5 seconds that Checo backed up out of Lewis, that would have been plenty of time for Lewis to safely pit under the safety car and still come out in front of Verstappen on fresh softs, and then, I mean, would have still been a soft versus soft shootout at the end, like both one versus the other, but Lewis would have had track position, as he did anyway, but better same tires and better engine, so he probably would have won.
Yeah, that's for sure. Yeah, well, thanks for that because I couldn't remember the gap, but now I do. It was about 9 seconds gained by Verstappen, thanks to Checo. Again, Lewis saying that was dangerous driving. He did the same with Alonso in Hungary, and you could really see the frustration going on with Lewis during that season, where I'm not sure if it was because he was unchallenged for, well, 4 years up to that point, and he had, I mean, yes, there was Vettel for the first half of 2018, but I don't know if it was because he was unchallenged by that point, but you could see visible frustration in his radio messages and his interviews when, Checo wasn't driving dangerously. It was, as Peter said, just good defense, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, against Vettel, there was hardly any on-track fighting with him and Hamilton. It's the same when you look at because some people like to compare 21 to 2006 with Alonso and Schumacher. The thing is, there was basically no on-track battles between those two except in Bahrain and Hungary. And this time there was a lot. And for Hamilton, he hadn't really had to fight people much or his teammate much since Rosberg 5 years earlier. So yeah, it would have been quite new, and yeah, he had been used to basically 4 years running at the front, not having to do much fighting, and basically being largely unchallenged. So maybe it was that frustration of having to now work for it, particularly because he'd had races, he'd had big stinkers early on, such as Monaco, where he was running around in 7th or 8th and couldn't make any headway, and Max got a win, which he probably wouldn't have got if Ferrari had been a bit more thorough with their pre-race checks on their cars. And then he blew that complete open goal in Baku. But then as a count, and then again in Hungary, is that he would have been frustrated because he was in that position of, well, I'm now fighting Alonso when I could have comfortably won this race if I had just not been the only person who decided to stay on wet tires after the restart, and then do that famous one car starting grid.
That was a great moment.
I mean, people love to say, "Oh, he lost the title in Abu Dhabi." It's like, well, there are about 4 or 5 races you can pick where he lost the title through his own errors rather than through all the dodgy things that were going on at race control.
Was it Imola where he put in the sand bed like a lap before Bottas and Russell collided? I think it was Imola, wasn't it?
It was Imola, yeah, and then they just after that they crash and get the race red flagged, and then because it's a red flag, he's allowed to unlap himself.
Yeah.
And so that's a race where he should have finished 7th or 8th, and he finished 2nd.
Yeah.
And that was the first genuine error he'd made in years as well, like a near race-ending accident, and yeah, the first one he'd made for a very, very long time.
Yeah, Lewis was really starting to feel the pressure by that point, I think. And
Yeah.
more than he had ever before. Like the last time Lewis faced any sort of pressure before that was probably the start of, well, 2019, I guess counts, but yeah, okay, 2018. I was going to say 2017, but I completely forgot about the 2018 title challenge from Vettel. So never mind on that.
17 and 18, he was behind for the first like 6 or 7 races, basically.
Yeah, 17 was a great challenge from Bottas, and then there was 2018 with Vettel.
Yeah.
And 2019, how close were Ferrari at the start?
No, 2019, that was the race. That was the year that was kind of notorious because there were like 6 1-2 finishes in a row for Mercedes. So no, 2019 was interesting because it was in the second half, in the middle of the season. Max took the win in he took wins in Austria and then Germany, and then Hungary he was fighting with Vettel with Hamilton for the lead. And then everyone was going into the summer break thinking, "Ooh, we might have a title fight here." But then he crashes out at the start of Spa, and then Ferrari get their illegal engine, and suddenly they're winning every race. But then it was too little, too late. And then after Sochi, where Vettel retires and then gives a perfectly timed virtual safety car to Lewis, which gives him the lead back, it's like, okay, well now it's done and dusted. Yeah, this is the first time in a while he actually had challenges on track, and obviously Verstappen had been threatening this because he after Monaco 2018 something clicked and he suddenly just was able to he switched on and became far less reckless and improved his pace a lot. And 2019, yeah, close challenging in the middle. 2020, he spent the whole season running basically 5 seconds behind the 2 Mercedes, and everyone got excited because Abu Dhabi 2020 he won, and they were like, "Oh, suddenly Red Bull are faster. This is the momentum for them." It's like, well, I think it's a bit early to say that because, well, Bottas is Bottas, and also Lewis clearly still had COVID because he was obviously coming back early because he'd seen what George had done in Sakia and didn't want him doing that again. So I think that was also by then both the titles are wrapped up, so I don't think Mercedes care if they win or lose. But then we'd seen in preseason testing for 2021, because the only rule changes they brought in thanks to COVID was that to just shave a bit of the floor off to reduce a bit of downforce, because originally the plan was to have the ground effect cars in 2021. And then there were problems with gearbox failures for Mercedes in preseason testing, and the car just clearly wasn't as drivable as before, because the 2020 car is, well, in terms of pure pace, it's the fastest Formula One car ever built, probably the fastest race car ever built when you look at the lap times. And now suddenly they've taken away some of the downforce, and it's not so drivable, and it's obvious it's going to be closer. And then you get into Bahrain and realize it is, and so that he realized, okay, I'm really going to have my work cut out for me this time.
Yeah, Bahrain 2021 was a really exciting moment for me because for once we actually had a title fight on our hands, and it wasn't just like the previous few occasions where teams did look strong at the start, but then, well, not just teams, also challengers like Bottas in 2017 looked strong at the start, but then fell apart, and now Red Bull had finally caught up, and it was very satisfying. And I came back to watching F1 full time for 2021. I came back at the end of 2020 to watching F1, and after like previously watching during the 2012. During that era before the turbo hybrids, and yeah, it was a really good season to watch, and like it was pretty much the ultimate story because we had this hotshot young Verstappen, new driver basically somewhat, well, he wasn't new anymore by that point, but he was the young guy, and then he had the old multiple time world champion, and it was really gonna be, okay, is this gonna be the moment where the torch is being passed on in effect, and it did end up being that to some degree. Although, of course, Hamilton and Alonso, the oldest drivers, are still pretty much the second or third best on the grid right now because the other youngsters haven't really caught up yet as much. Yeah.
This is a very early prediction and like quite an early question to ask, but do you guys think Antonelli will do the same thing as Verstappen did back in 2015 and 16 and just storm through the pack, basically?
It's difficult to say because Max, it wasn't so obvious with Max because he'd only done a single year in single seaters and he didn't win the title. He was very impressive in it. But I think a lot of people were thinking this is just way too early. It wasn't like Kimi Antonelli where he is just like wiping the floor with everybody. And I'm still skeptical because he's skipping Formula 3 to go straight to Formula 2 from Frecker. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, Max is kind of a unique one because he's not the first driver whose dad was also in Formula 1, but he seems to have had some very specific kind of training for this. He's been, for lack of a better term, groomed into being an F1 driver. It's just been hammered into him from day one. And Jost, you can talk about his teaching methods or whatever, but it's clearly worked. And he's never thought about anything else, and this has all been all these planned. Kimi Antonelli, as far as I know, his parents, his mum or his dad, they're not racing drivers. Obviously, not in Formula One. Maybe they could be in something else. I don't know. But he's a bit older, so I think maybe he could do all right. But I don't think it's gonna. He could do something similar to what Piastri has done, because Piastri again has done like a clean sweep of championships. But I don't think he's going to be coming in and winning races from the start.
Yeah, I'm skeptical about Antonelli. I don't really compare him as much to Verstappen as I do to Pourchaire. And the thing about Antonelli is, if you look at him, this guy is still, he's in the later part of puberty, but he's still somewhat in puberty. Like, he's not built like a racing driver as much yet. Like, if you look at Verstappen, when he entered, when he was in F3, he was already quite a beast. I mean, he was really young, but he was really like already quite the well trained, let's just say. And Antonelli is just like he doesn't have the build yet, and I think he should have done F3 first before F2, because now you get this kid who's still like at the end of puberty going into this sport with these far more tough drivers, and I don't think it was right to rush him in there. I think he's a very promising talent. I hope he can win F2. I don't think he's going to do it in his first year there. And I mean, I don't know who's going to stop him, because Vesti, I guess, and Behrman are probably the main, and there's also Martins and a few others. But well, if yeah, I don't know. I don't think Antonelli is in the physical shape to win the F2 title for now. And then if he ends up not winning it in his first season, and then he might struggle in the second season, and if he only wins it in his third season, then he's basically on the same trajectory as Pourchaire. And Pourchaire was better prepared for F2 because he did F3 first. Like, he wasn't quite as out of his depth in terms of the physicality of the whole thing as Antonelli is going to be. And we know that Pourchaire was touted as like the next big thing, the next Leclerc or something. And we all know how that turned out. He did eventually win the title in his third time of asking. He should have won it in his second year not later than the second year, in my opinion.
Another complication with Antonelli is because he's a Mercedes junior, and so he's in the hierarchy. He's behind both Vesti and Schumacher, but also Hamilton and Russell have contracts going into the end of 2026. So until then, at least, he can't get a seat with Mercedes. Even with Williams, I think it would be a long shot, because Toto seems to be desperate to give Mick a seat, and I think because he feels he owes it to Michael to get Mick back in Formula One. And he tried to get him in Logan Sargent's seat, and that didn't happen because James Vowles is trying to snuff it and get rid of those associations. So I think, and then you also have to factor in like Paul Aaron. He's also, well, I don't know if it's confirmed, he's more than likely going up to Formula 2 next year, and he's another Mercedes junior who did do Formula 3. So he'll have to do a lot of queue jumping, I think, if he does want to get into Formula One after a year or two in Formula 2.
And on Mick Schumacher wanting to come back in F1 and thinking he can, I really don't know how he goes from Alpine endurance back into F1. I mean, he wants to come back, and as we said, Toto wants him to come back. And I know that Con, for example, is quite a big fan of Mick, but I don't see how you go from endurance to F1 in the current state of things, unless there is some Alpine deal where one of Ocon and Gasly leaves, which is unlikely to me, and unless he goes to Williams. Yeah, it's just weird to go from Le Mans to Monaco again for me. I think his F1 career is over, but that's just what I think. What do you think, Con?
Yeah, we discussed this on a Rumor episode actually, to some degree. I think that Mick's way back into F1, the most likely option is going to be with Alpine, and that because we heard these rumors earlier this year about Audi having their eyes set on Ocon and Hülkenberg and Sainz. Like, there's a few drivers being mentioned for Audi, but reportedly they're trying to get Ocon for the Audi, and also there's reportedly tension at Alpine behind the scenes, which, yeah, that team lacks any real management structures. The drivers can't stand each other. Of course, there's going to be tension there. Both contracts run out in next year, if I remember correctly. And if Ocon does end up going to Audi, and I think he's still being managed by Toto Wolff, might be. So maybe Toto could facilitate that. Then Toto could get his other driver that he's managing now to some degree. I don't know if he's fully managing Mick, but he's definitely trying to refer Mick and get him into a seat. And then there's going to be the option to get Mick into the Alpine, because Jack Doohan hasn't exactly been too convincing. Like, he's been somewhat stagnant. He's a really, really strong driver, but I don't know, maybe should have won F2 this year based on his performance last year. And who else is there for Alpine? There's a few more names there, but Kvyat was development driver for them and reserve driver for them in 2021, but there's no chance that he's going to get back into the sport, not well. There's no chance of any Russian sponsors backing him due to all the embargoes and stuff. And I don't know, Alpine doesn't have that many candidates. There's been some talk of potentially taking Guan Yu Zhou there for Alpine, but I don't think there's anything going to be coming from that. So, Peter?
Yeah, Jack Doohan has kind of shot himself in the foot because he's decided to sit out F2 and focus on Alpine and his development role, which would make sense if it was 20 years ago and he was going to be doing thousands of miles of testing. But I don't understand what he's thinking. He's going to do a whole year of not racing, basically spending the year doing a little bit of simulator work, maybe one FP1 session, and otherwise, standing behind whoever their team principal is, wearing headphones, looking seriously at the camera. Like, there's no indication of either of those two drivers leaving. And yes, he's the first one up because Victor Martins has kind of flopped a bit in F2, and isn't Kushmaini at Alpine as well? There's a few others, but lower down. So he's the first pick, but he's not exactly wowing people. And you need to be proactive and keep yourself doing something. Particularly if Alpine are going to fund your year in Formula 2, you may as well keep going. But rather than just sitting around doing nothing, because people forget about you. And this is what's going to happen with Drugovich, is that he's kind of the moment has gone, I think, with him in terms of getting into F1 or getting anywhere interesting, particularly as he turned down seats in IndyCar and Formula E to focus on being an Aston Martin reserve in two of the most exclusive seats, because Daddy's cash is not going away so long as Aston Martin exists, and Alonso is immortal and is going to be there till he's 100 probably. So,
I mean, based on what you just said, I think Jack Doohan could be trying for a McLaren seat, because he's seeking to the Alpine development driver role, and we all know how that turned out for Piastri. So, what do we think of that?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, again, Piastri, he's got a few years on his McLaren contract. It's longer than Lando's. I mean, Lando, people say he might go to Red Bull. Maybe Lando wants to leave. I don't think he should. I mean, both of them have a good thing going on at McLaren. I mean, they have their own juniors because they have, Gabriel Bortoleto, who just won F3 and he's going up to F2. He's a McLaren junior. Ryo Hirakawa, which is a really odd choice, a Japanese, like a 30-year-old Japanese Super Formula or Super GT driver who's never really done anything with single-seaters, let alone racing in Europe. That's a really strange decision. And even Pato O'Ward is now talking about going up to F1. So there's just a huge... Every team has got a massive queue of people vying to get into them. and we've ended up with a new season coming up with an unchanged driver lineup. It's just becoming so exclusive. We don't need to go back to the years of, say, 1994 when there were like 45 drivers that competed for about 25 seats and kept switching around. But there does need to be a bit more turnover, I think.
Yeah, definitely need we definitely need an 11 for 12 team even, because there's so much talent going on. I've said it before, but with the current attention on Formula 2 and Formula 3, with the fact that most fans actually know who's doing well in Formula 2 now, even if you're not even following, you will have heard of the names of Sargent before he came in. You would have heard of Mazepin. With so much attention, it's just weird to still only have 10 teams. It just doesn't make sense to me, and it just keeps making us think who should be leaving, who should be allowing new talent. I mean, I remember in 2021 when Alonso came back. So when he announced it in June 2020, people used to say, "Yeah, why is Alonso coming back when he's stealing a seat from Guan Yu Zhou or Christian Lundgaard?" That was what people were thinking, because that's how much we need new seats for, because otherwise actual good drivers are being tipped to just leave. And one of those drivers who was in a hot seat this year was Yuki Tsunoda, who, well, going back to the race, had a great race in Abu Dhabi 21. But even a few weeks ago, I mean last week, he had a great race in Abu Dhabi 2023 as well. So maybe it's just that he likes the track. I don't personally understand why Yuki is always in a hot seat. I mean, I understand in terms of he is an Alpha Tauri who can just get rid of drivers anytime. But Yuki being in a hot seat just summarizes the current situation at the moment, where we need more seats. Otherwise, decent drivers are constantly feeling like they might not get another contract. And Tsunoda's drive in 2021 Abu Dhabi, while in effect it got him a contract extension for 2022. So just thinking about that question, Con, did you think he deserved that extension going into 2022?
I don't think it was this race in particular that got him the extension. I don't remember exactly when his extension was announced. I just remember that he himself was surprised about it because he felt that he had underperformed, and he thought that given how critical Helmut Marko was of him before that point, he was expecting to be axed, especially given how Marco had axed Albon for his performance at Red Bull the year before, and Gasly in 2019 mid-season, well, not completely axed, but like demoted at the very least. And yeah, Tsunoda was definitely surprised about it.
Yeah, I mean, it was very shaky beginning of the season. There were a few crashes early on. I mean, he had a very good debut because he scored points in Bahrain. And because the Formula 2 the year before, he finished third and he'd been kind of middling it. And then he suddenly made this big surge in the last few races when he was told, if you finish in this position, you get the super license points you need to get into Formula 1. But like every other Japanese driver, he's there at the mercy of, well, all of them. It's been at the mercy of either Honda, Toyota, Yamaha, or the other ones, whatever. All the other engine suppliers that we've had, Japanese engine suppliers. That's basically and he's there because of Honda. So once they go, because again they're in the future they're parting ways with Red Bull. That's probably him gone as well. Yeah, but this race before this, he'd just been average, because that was a very good Alpha Tauri, and Gasly was supreme in 2021, particularly qualifying. He was almost always in Q3, and he had races like I think he was fourth or fifth in Zandvoort. And Yuki scored modest points, but just not enough for a rookie, I guess. And this race, it kind of came out of nowhere because obviously the end was so chaotic and there was so much going on. I think he kind of lucked his way into that position and managed to hold it. And now this year, there's 2023. There has been a bit of a breakthrough because he showed more maturity and leadership skills, and he's working with it's a shame it's been wasted on a much less competitive car. But then he had races like Mexico. But then again, he ended at Abu Dhabi. So maybe he likes this track, or maybe he just gets into a rhythm as the season goes on, and it takes him a long time to get there. I don't know.
Yeah, 2023 was a really strong year for Yuki Tsunoda, and well, he had he had a whole slouch in between. Like from Austria onwards, he had a bunch of really weak races in Austria. Especially, he went over the track limit so many times, and I think he got a few penalties out of that. And that probably from that point onward, he was struggling more. But the 2023 is probably the one season where I actually believe, okay, this time he earned himself a contract extension because he was beating all of his teammates in on the quality quality pace across the various sessions. He's slightly ahead of Ricardo. He was somewhat more ahead of Lawson, and he was very comfortably beating Nick de Vries at the start of the year. And he had really taken a step up this year for sure. Because if you look at the last few years, he didn't. I don't want to say he didn't take it quite as seriously, but we did see his interviews and stuff where he was talking about like he didn't want to work out, and he was instead wanted to like play video games, and he wasn't very matured yet. But this year you could see that he had physically taken a step up, like in terms of workout and everything, but also his mindset was different because we saw the first few races of the season, after every single race he got out of the car, he was exhausted. He had given it everything, and it did pay off for him. He had some great performances and scored points with a car that probably should not have been anywhere near the points near the start of the year. So that was very respectable. He really stepped up to the plate to lead the team. Compared to 2021, which is of course what we're talking about, where Gasly completely wiped the floor with him. Yuki was surprised he got the contract extension. For the most part, underperformed that year quite a lot. I think he did score on his debut, didn't he? I think, and that probably made people think, okay, this is going to be one proper rookie again. But then it didn't really turn out that way for most of 2021.
Well, that overtake on Bottas, I think, was his headline for 2021. That probably, well, it went unnoticed because that overtake on Bottas happened when everyone was focused on the main battle that we are going to talk about soon. But him overtaking a Mercedes on pure pace, then again, it's Bottas. Sometimes he just loses focus, especially in those conditions. We know how unaggressive he can be, especially when defending. He will just let people through usually. But Yuki being able to overtake a Merc really made people think, okay, he deserves a shot for 2022. Let's see what happens. And then, yeah, for 2023, he's been good. I'm one of those who thinks he's been good. And also, maybe now he realizes that he needs to be in F1 for a few more years if he really wants to open his 3-star Michelin restaurant, which he has claimed to be his final end goal. But yeah, Abu Dhabi seems to be a good track for his skills. And in the end, I was glad that he did get the contract extension because, well, yes, he was beaten quite badly by Gasly. But that friendship that he had with Gasly, I think, really made him more mature in the end for 2023. We must not forget that he came from Japanese F4 and had to kind of fast track F3 and F2 into Formula One. He went through the ranks very quickly, and I wasn't surprised to see that he was still a bit immature because I don't think even he expected to go through the European Championships as quick as he did.
And yeah, so with this race, by finishing P4, obviously very out of position for him when you consider that most of his rivals, which was teams like, well, his teammate, but also Alpha Tauri and Alfa Romeo and even Williams were much further back, and they had their own battles going on. I mean, Alfa Romeo, it was kind of a transition for them because they had it was the last ever race for both Kimi Räikkönen and Giovinazzi, which ended kind of anticlimactically because both of them had mechanical failures. And for Räikkönen, obviously at this point, one-time champion, very popular, most experienced driver in Formula 1 history at that time. It was a very anticlimactic, but I suppose also a very Kimi way of ending because he's not someone who'd want to go out in a bang. He'd want to do things quietly and not say much because there was an attempt to give him driver of the day just to get him interviewed, and he did get driver of the day, but it was so I think by that, but based on how the race ended, I think everyone had stopped caring about whether or not he gets he gets forced to do an interview asking for his opinions on it.
Yeah, that really took attention away from Kimi the way the race ended there. But driver of the day he did get. I didn't think he'd get it, but then I checked earlier and it turned out, yeah, the people actually did vote him in. He got it twice that season, if I remember correctly. The other time was, I think, the race right after he had announced his retirement, if I remember correctly. Or
Was it Portimao?
no, not Portimao 2020.
It was later in the season than that. I think I
Yeah,
think it was meant to be Zandvoort, but then he missed that because of COVID.
exactly. He missed Zandvoort due to COVID, and the race after as well, which was Monza, I think. Wasn't it?
Yeah,
Monza also was
Kubica
COVID.
stood in for him in both of those.
Yeah, and then, so I think Kimi might have won the race, the driver of the day, the race after. I think he won it twice that year. I'm not entirely sure, but I thought it was like that. But yeah, that was the final F1 race for Giovinazzi and Raikkonen. Raikkonen, in a way, he did go out with a bang, but not the kind of bang that you'd want. And I mean, he was complaining about brake issues already earlier in the weekend. We can, I think F1 on the YouTube channel published like an insider video into Kimi's final weekend, and there was like a bit from the technical debrief where he basically said the car doesn't brake. He has no trust in the brakes whatsoever. The car doesn't turn, and yeah, that came very much true in the race with that unfortunate DNF for him. Giovinazzi also got a DNF. Had Giovinazzi not gotten the DNF, he would have been one of only 2 drivers to finish every single race that season, the other being Carlos Sainz. So that's a little fun fact right there. And then there's one more backmarker to talk about right now, but one more for later, who also did not finish the race, which was, of course, George Russell, but I don't entirely remember what happened to him. Also, there's one more backmarker who did not finish the race, but who also didn't start it, because, of course, Nikita Mazepin had COVID that race and ended up not starting. Despite, I think I think he did take part in qualifying. I'd have to check that again. But yeah, so that's one more potential backmarker DNF that didn't happen because he didn't participate.
Well, yeah, what I get from all these DNFs is every single important final race didn't end well. So Raikkonen, DNF, Giovinazzi, final race, DNF, Russell. We all, I think, at least I wanted a nice ending for him at Williams. That didn't happen. And then Mazepin, I didn't really want a nice ending, but the fact he never really had a final race is kind of dramatic. But yeah, Raikkonen with Alfa Romeo, just quickly, for me it was summed up, well, obviously he had good performances, but it was summed up by the water refill issues. He never seemed to get the drink at any races, I think. And it wasn't only him, Giovinazzi also had issues with that water pump thing. But yeah, it was quite unfortunate for both Alphas to not get a proper ending to this season, especially as Kimi and Antonio got along really well. I personally loved the video at the end of the race where Antonio is telling Kimi's daughter that, yeah, I'll come see you during the holidays. It just seemed we saw such a human part to Kimi thanks to Giovinazzi. And I think that at the end of the day, that's how that Alfa Romeo partnership will be remembered. It was this very human, nice teammate relationship back then. And yeah, Russell would have his final race with Williams, went to Merck. It was just, yeah, it was shambolic for all the backmarkers that race. No one really got the send-off that they deserved or should have had.
Yeah, Giovinazzi and Raikkonen was a great partnership with Alfa Romeo. They had already known each other prior because, of course, Giovinazzi was working as, I don't know if it was reserve or something at Ferrari in 2018 during Kimi's final year there, but then they even knew each other before then because at some point during his junior career, I don't know, well, GP3 or something. At some point, Giovinazzi was driving for Double R Racing, which is, of course, Kimi's junior team, which is competing in a bunch of categories. Well, I don't think it's competing in many categories anymore, but it was competing in a bunch of categories. Which, by the way, also Jamie Chadwick did drive for I think 1 or 2 seasons with Double R Racing. So Kimi's one of the founders and owners of that team, so that's probably how he met Giovinazzi in the first place, and they always got on great. Like Kimi at some point said that he only had two friends in the paddock, and those were Vettel and Giovinazzi, and it really showed whenever these two were on screen together. Like, well, maybe not in terms of cars being side by side, but when they were out of the cars, it always showed that these had great chemistry. And yeah, that team was really overlooked that season. But that team also, they completely wasted the resources they had, because at the start of the year we always heard from Vasseur, oh, there's more to come from our car, and then they didn't develop it, and it fell back, and at some point it was not even able to challenge the Williams as much anymore as it was at the start of the year. It was still slightly better at some races, but they could have done more with that Sauber.
Yeah, I mean, Kimi, he'd had brake faults because he actually crashed rather prophetically at turn 14 in practice. So things are just kind of going wrong on that front. An interesting take or an interesting point is that when it was either when he retired or when Giovinazzi retired, because I think they have them very close together, there was a virtual safety car, and Toto Wolff was trying to basically haggle with race control to not use a full safety car. Obviously they didn't in the end, but that's again a lot of these games that we'd seen earlier in the season, especially at Jeddah, about trying to say, oh well, can we start with this grid order when we restart, or that one, or how do we do it? That's him again trying to get one up and playing his own games in a way that jeopardizes safety, essentially. Because if that had been a full safety car, well, Lewis was ahead, but not by much. It would have closed things up. Max could have had a go, but again, Lewis would have pulled away. It again would have had the effects of Lewis not being far enough ahead at the end to pit. But what difference it might have made is that maybe no one would have been lapped, because they wouldn't have gained enough time. So that could have had quite a significant effect, because that did end up becoming a big factor, as the issue of drivers unlapping themselves under safety cars.
Right.
Yeah.
And well, yeah, that leads us to the reason there was a safety car, which was Latifi's crash. This is still a very funny moment to me, not because of the fact there was, like, let's forget the title fight part of it. I absolutely loved that Latifi and Mick were fighting for, was it P15 or 14 at that point? I think it was 14. They were fighting for it so hard, because we only remember the crash bit, but if you look at the onboards, that fight had been going on for the entire lap before that. There was a nice cutback as well from Mick, I think, at some point. So they were really fighting tooth and nail for P14, which meant absolutely nothing in the standings. I guess when you drive all those back markers, well, Mick was higher than he should have been. So I think Mick was happy that he was actually, battling with someone, because let's not forget the Haas's were absolutely atrocious in 2021. They were often just on their own at the back. So there was that fight going, and then yes, obviously Latifi crushes, conspiracy arises, controversy arises. Was Latifi in any way involved in some kind of title deciding, rigging? What do you think, Peter?
I mean, the thing that surprises me is that he was fighting with a Haas in the first place, because as you mentioned, Haas were nowhere.
Same.
I mean, across the year, like Mick, he had a small battle with a limping Verstappen at Hungary. Mazepin, the gap between him and Mazepin was often as big as the gap between him and everyone else. Mazepin pulled off two very impressive overtakes on him at Silverstone and Sao Paulo, but otherwise neither of them really did anything all year. But yeah, I don't even know how, because obviously we were ignoring what was going on at the back at this point, because you could see the gap, Hamilton's gap was just getting bigger and bigger. You knew it was coming and waiting for the race to end with him as champion, completely ignoring what's going on at the back. And then he suddenly crashes chasing after a Haas that he should have been comfortably faster than. If you want to make a conspiracy, I don't really know. You'd have to use quite a lot of mental gymnastics, because Williams, Mercedes customer team, so he himself was not a Mercedes junior. George was. It was of no benefit to Mercedes to get a safety car unless he was trying to get a red flag. because even so, that doesn't help them because they had this under control. Mercedes. He used to be a Red Bull junior. No, not Red Bull's Renault. But this is after Renault had left Red Bull. There's no, I don't think, I don't think there's any deliberate thing there. I think it's just him crashing. It does reek of convenience because the title's all but lost, and then here comes this like manna from heaven, basically for Red Bull. In terms of red flagging it doesn't justify a red flag because the barriers were not damaged. There was just some debris on the track, but it wasn't completely blocked. Red flagging would have looked very suspicious because it's like, okay, now you're trying to go for a dramatic end. Because and we would have had the last 5 laps. I mean, again, Lewis still would have won it if they'd done that, but it was I think it was just an enormous coincidence, I suppose.
Would have been far less controversial though had they gone for red flag and then just restart under proper conditions. Like the barriers did get moved a little bit, I think, by the impact, and of course the debris was partially on track, although not on a racing line. And considering all teams had previously agreed to finish races, if possible, under green flag conditions, I would have understood going for a red flag, and it would have been less controversial, I think. And Max Verstappen might have had a chance. We might have had another collision between Max and Lewis, perhaps, if they would have gone for it for 5 laps. And on soft tires, maybe the balance of both cars also would have been different. I don't know, hard to judge. But on what you said, Latifi should have never been fighting a Haas in the first place, considering the Haas throughout the season, on average, in quali, I think it was like 3 seconds off the Red Bull, or something like that, something completely perverse. And I think the Williams was like 2.2 seconds or something, so still much faster than the Haas, even though it was abysmal. But how on earth was Latifi fighting Mick on not just this once, but it started in Bahrain. Bahrain was the first race where Mick was challenging Latifi on pace, despite having a much slower car. Latifi was just nowhere that year. For the most part, he had a moment in not even his moment of his own creation in Hungary. I think it was where he somehow slid into the points, if I remember correctly, because of the crash, or was that? Or am I confusing 2021 or 2022 now? Where was it that Latifi scored?
It was Hungary. He beat George as well. George scored points as well. Yeah. He kept himself out of trouble, basically.
Yeah.
There's the thing, at this point he was still okay. 2022 was when he started becoming a serial crasher. He obviously just didn't enjoy the ground effect cars. But 2021, this was the difference, is that even though George was Mr. Saturday and would blitz him in qualifying, Latifi was better on race pace and was good at keeping himself out of trouble, which is how he had results like Hungary. And then he scored points again in Spa, the race that never happened, because he got himself into Q3 in quali, and obviously George got second and he was 9th or something. So there was the car was just better for a bit, and then it started deteriorating again towards the end of the season. But they had a brief period in the middle where it was actually quite competitive, whereas Haas were always right at the back. But this, I mean, the barriers that it was arm code. There were no. If it was Tech Pro, they probably would have red flagged it because Tech Pro barriers are designed to deform. But these are Armco barriers at that corner. But yeah, they called the safety car, and it took a while to call it, and then it went on for just too long. I mean, all safety cars take too long because they should just let lap cars overtake immediately, and they always have to wait until everyone's lined up with each other first, and then they can do it. And this one, they cleared the car because it was quite easy to clear it up, and you were just sat there waiting for the safety car to end or when they were going to announce it, because you knew that there were only a few laps left. And is it going to end under a safety car or isn't it? It's just it was just so much uncertainty and so much time wastage as well.
Yeah, on the race fixing question regarding Latifi, I mean, the stronger argument could be made that he probably was trying to fix the race for Mercedes, but even that's a long shot considering that Mercedes were looking completely set to win the race. But like in theory, crash the car, safety car finish, no risk at all of Verstappen getting past. Like that's far more likely than him fixing the race for Red Bull. But either way, I don't think there was anything deliberate about this. It was just Latifi being Latifi.
Same here. Like there was nothing that could have led to Latifi doing this. And also, there would have had to be at least some suspicious radio message. Latifi has no idea where I think Lewis is and Max is, and I doubt he even cares about it. So like, yeah, any call that there was some rigging for me is utter nonsense. There's no way there could have been this. However, one case where there might be rigging was Mr. Michael Massey deciding to do things for, I quote, entertainment. Was entertainment the term he used? He said something like, I wanted entertain. It's a show. I
He
wanted
said,
everyone to be a show.
he said it's a race. After the race had ended, he said it's a motor race, and we went motor racing. Was what he said to Toto.
Yeah. Yeah, he said that to
afterwards.
Toto, but I know that in the interview he said also that Formula One should be entertainment or something like this. So he also did say something that was much worse, I believe, than what he told Toto. It was all, well, I remember just after that happened, I looked up Michael Massey's career up to then, and he was underqualified. That's for sure. He was thrusted into the role when, well, Charlie Whiting had to leave for obvious reasons, and he was obviously not meant to be there, and he shouldn't have been the person in charge of that decision. Now, letting all the drivers unlap themselves at that point, it was just unnecessary. The drivers didn't care about it. Alonso famously said, yeah, why is Verstappen behind me? He should be in front of me. This makes no sense. So yeah, Con, what do you think?
I fundamentally disagree that Muzzy was the wrong person for the job because he was Charlie Whiting's protege. Like he was learning previously directly from Whiting, and he was there with him when Whiting took his decisions. I think the much bigger problem was just the fact that the team principals had a direct line of communication to him, which started the whole thing with, you have to do this, you have to reinstate the last lap, this is not right, you have to call a safety car, you have to whatever. Previously, when Toto was arguing for only a VSC, not a safety car, what it was that we brought up earlier. So I think it was really a problem with Masi being underqualified because he was groomed for this position for when Whiting was going to depart, and he, for the most part, he did do a pretty good job in terms of what was actually down to him. But then, of course, what was not as much down to him was stuff like the track limit situation that year that caused a lot of controversy because, like, Michael Masi didn't write the rules by himself. Like, he wasn't the main guy responsible behind that, and he also wasn't the guy who decided that, okay, team principal should have the direct line of communication to him. And I think he even criticized it after Abu Dhabi that like the team principal should have just let him do his job, if I remember correctly, and instead of just constantly calling in and pestering him and lobbying, because then afterwards, of course, it always was going to look like, okay, he was following the instructions of one of the team principals, which was, of course, one of the big conspiracy theories brought up afterwards. Oh, Red Bull told him what to do. Well, so did Mercedes. Everyone told him what to do, and whatever he was going to do, it would have been something that someone told him to do because they had a direct line of communication, which they should have never had. But I don't know. I don't think Michael Masi was as terrible as people like to remember him because, for the most part, he was just caught by the regulations. And I mean, the teams did, like I said, the teams did agree, okay, we end the race under green flag conditions, if possible at all. And also, he was allowed to only let some drivers unlap themselves because it did state in the regulations that any drivers, like the phrasing was any drivers, not all drivers, and any drivers would imply that he can also just select a bunch of them. So they then called it the human error champion thing. They went the whole, okay, that was human error, the whole thing, and but that was down to just the phrasing of the rules being bad. So that was the human error involved. Like, I don't think Muzzy did anything particularly wrong there, but that's just my opinion. Peter, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean the safety car rules are stupid anyway because it's because he originally contradicted himself by saying, "Oh, they're not going to unlap themselves," and then you decide at the last minute they can. the one thing people protest, and this is where the whole void lap 58 thing came from, was the fact that there's a rule that says that after cars have unlapped themselves, you then have to do a whole lap before you bring the safety car in. Which there's no logic behind that. Instead, it should just be the rule, and I said this in my manifesto. As soon as the lead driver catches the safety car, then the lapped cars can unlap themselves while maintaining position. That would have saved so much time. We could have had the safety car done in 3 laps if they'd just done it that way, and then we would have had however many laps extra it would have been to race at the end. It's such a slow process, and it took way too long. But yeah, there is that loophole of any rather than all drivers must unlap themselves. And obviously, he did the ones in between. He was obviously thinking of the entertainment factor, but also because to save time, because otherwise you would have had like twice as many cars getting past him, and he just needed to get it done quickly because they'd been so indecisive about what was happening at the end. That was the problem.
And there was also another rule there that he made use of that allowed him to call the safety car in at any point, if I remember correctly. So, like, theoretically, somewhere else in the rules it stated, okay, the safety car should do one more lap after drivers have unlapped themselves, any drivers. But I think there was also another point in the rules where it explicitly stated that he can, at his own discretion, call in the safety car at any point. If I remember correctly, I thought there was also something like that at the time.
Yeah, it just needs it's just things that need looking at, because the whole thing had been dodgy. Because again, there were complaints that of Christian saying, he said something like it only takes 1 lap to end a race, or something cryptic to Massey at the end, which people took as saying, "Oh, give us a lap because we know that Verstappen can pass him." And then, early in the race, we'd had Toto basically explicitly saying, "Don't use the safety car, please," when it's not his decision to make. But the whole point of saying Max could pass him, we need to bring this back, is the fact that they took advantage of this because Red Bull pitted, but Mercedes didn't. And people say, well, he needed track position. So yes, but then they needed to also consider this race might not, the safety car was not going to be that long, and that they would need good tyres if they're going to have to fight again at the end. And this is where Red Bull tend to be very opportunistic and race strategy. And we've seen this particularly with Hannah Schmidt on the pit lane, the stuff she was cooking up this year and last year. Mercedes have often covered their poor strategies by having a car that's just much faster than everyone else. And this is just them being overly cautious. Because if Lewis also had fresh tyres, who knows what would have happened on the fastest lap if he would have won or not.
But one thing is, they would have had to guess if Max pits as well, which I understand that. I also think that if Lewis had pitted, then anyway he would have gotten Max. So not taking the risk was uncalculated. And secondly, I think it's a great thing that we don't hear the discussions between team principals or teams and the whoever's race director, because that was such a big issue. I remember when that whole "did you see my email" thing, no one should have heard that, and it shouldn't have been asked in the first place. That Toto says, I sent you an email with the positions, did you see my email? Firstly, he shouldn't have asked that, but also it was such an entertainment focused decision to make us know, to let us know about these conversations, when it wasn't needed. And going back to Massey's decision, it could be seen as race fixing, because he did decide something on his own, and he did admit that he did things for entertainment. I don't think that anything should be voided or anything should be cancelled because of that, but we should also assess it for what it was, which is a man kind of decided what should happen.
I don't know if it counts as race fixing in the sense that you would describe Singapore 2008, because that was a deliberate action to give a particular driver a particular advantage or position. Whereas with this, despite what some people say, there is no evidence that he did this to try and give the championship to Max. Because if the whole plan all season was, we're going to fix this season so Max has the title, he would have won it 4 or 5 races sooner. they wouldn't have left it until the last lap of the last race to suddenly think, oh, let's give it to him now. It was a decision based on entertainment. It wasn't a decision based on trying to stop Lewis beating Schumacher's record of titles or something like that. He just didn't want the season ending very anticlimactically under a safety car. And and even if you're depending, obviously it depends on how you'll feel about everything that happened. You cannot deny it is one of the greatest moments in the history of this sport, that last lap, if not the greatest, like just from an entertainment perspective. And it's whereas this race would be nowhere near as well remembered if it just ended under a safety car and Lewis got the title. It would have fallen into the similar levels of obscurity to say the 2014 race.
Would have been on par with the occasion where Paul di Resta made the race finish on a safety car and to decide the title, if I remember that correctly. Back to what Nav said also, I don't think he said something along the lines of that Mercedes about the decision to pit at Mercedes, and I think Mercedes just should have gone for the pit stop one way or another, even if they would have ended up behind Max Verstappen. Like Nav said something along the lines of that they were estimating whether or not they'd be able to make it ahead of Verstappen, but I don't think it should have mattered because they had the faster car. Even if Lewis had been right behind Max on fresh soft tires, one lap shootout, Lewis takes the cake. Unless, of course, the safety car remains out there and they finish on the safety car, in which case they would have thrown away the title with that decision. So that was, I guess, the big question they took there. But Max had already pitted by that point, didn't he? Because he pitted on lap 53 or 58, yeah.
I think Max pitted pretty much immediately. I can't remember if Lewis had passed the pit lane, so he would have had to do in a whole lap. But they just didn't. They didn't take the chance because obviously he would have passed the pit lane before Max.
No.
And so they didn't know. But the thing is, they should have really, looking back at it, they really should have banked on Max pitting, because he was always going to do that because he had enough of a gap behind to mean he could pit for fresh tires, and they knew that he had nothing else left in his armory other than to attack him with fresh tires. So they really should have had the foresight to think that's going to happen. In which case that would have given them an opportunity for a free pit stop as well. This is my issue. This is my thing about Mercedes and their strategies really not working out for them, and having sometimes cost them race wins when they've had less competitive cars in recent years. And Red Bull, whereas the Red Bull have always had very good strategies, and they don't mess them up nearly as much. But again, as well, another thing going back a little further is also they didn't have, like, Checo had done what he did in terms of defensive driving. Bottas was invisible for the whole race. He was invisible for most of the season, other than winning in Turkey and having the world's longest pit stop in Monaco. Is that he wasn't in a position to help. And neither of it, that was the kind of thing that we get tied on points. Is the battle for the constructors is basically the battle of the second driver, that it ends up going to Bottas in the end, winning it for them, with the other two tied on points. So it just came down to just those two, and it was just that lack of opportunism, or just making assumptions that yes, the race will end like this, even though it would need to be a very long safety car to end the race like that.
Yeah, just in the end, it did give us a great moment, which was that last lap, and we will always remember it. So Massey, when making that entertainment comment, well, he had something there, because it might genuinely be the most memorable moment of modern F1, and that move had to be completed. It wasn't all done. Verstappen had to complete that move. It was a good move, honestly. I would say that it was at the right moment, because he had to calculate that move, because Lewis had a really good final lap. Lewis could have been eaten up on the first corner, honestly, and Lewis had a good fastest lap. Let's not forget that Max had this leg cramp in the last lap, which we saw when he slid in the last corner. And again, imagine if he didn't catch that slide. If he ends up in the wall,
Oh man,
it would have been movie worthy, because that was a big slide. Yeah, it was quite a big slide. It wasn't like some Lando Norris at Abu Dhabi quali slide, but he drifted out of that final corner. So yeah, he still had to fight that leg cramp, and Yeah, world champion, which leads us to wonder, was he a worthy world champion? The Lewis Hamilton fans will always say that it was very much a stolen win. Personally, I think that he was a worthy world champion because he was better than Lewis throughout the entire. If we look at the entire season, I would say that Verstappen was more worthy of becoming champion. Was it stolen from Lewis? Well, Lewis would have won if the Massey decision didn't take place. So I guess there's a conversation there. But I was much more at peace with myself knowing that Verstappen was champion in the very end. Considering the entire season, I thought he performed better. What do you think, Peter?
On the cramp, I think actually it was because of that he passed him where he did. He wasn't supposed to pass him at turn 4, but because he cramped, he couldn't brake properly. So he just kind of went with it because that was quite early to do it. And then obviously Lewis almost got him in the final sector. But yeah, with the title, I mean, you can argue that the race was stolen from Hamilton, but the title wasn't. It was almost stolen from Max until the Latifi's crashed, basically. Because if you go through, we'd had the endless controversy of track limits and deciding what is and isn't a track limits violation, and we saw Bahrain where Max passed him off track and then gave the position back and then couldn't get past him again, even though both of them had violated track limits at like almost every lap at turn 4 in Bahrain because the race control said you could. And so he essentially gave up the lead when he didn't need to. And then things like, we mentioned Imola. Lewis got very lucky that the red flag meant he unlapped himself and he gained a lot from that. Baku, that cost Max the win. That was a funny one because we got the red flag, and I think Red Bull were trying to argue, can we just stop the race now and not continue so that he still gets the win? It's like, no, it's going to continue. You can't do that. But then Hamilton, that's a complete open goal. That alone cost him the title. Then you can throw in Silverstone. People like to say, no, it's Max's fault. No, that was Lewis's fault, that crash. I mean, we've seen him pull that move several times in several other people. And because of the red flag, he got away with it because he actually had terminal damage. But because the race got red flagged, he was able to fix it. And then they give him that pathetic penalty, which was never going to stop him winning the race. Hungary, that was an own goal from Lewis because Bottas basically completely parted like the Red Sea for him in terms of clearing out all of his main rivals. But then he threw it away by not pitting for dries and being the only driver that didn't pit for dries at the restart, when he could have easily won that race. And then he got second place off of Vettel's disqualification, so that gained him a bunch of points. Monza is kind of there or thereabouts because the way they collided and everything. People have a go at Verstappen because he walked away at the end without checking on him. And it's like, well, Hamilton, you can see Hamilton putting the car in reverse, trying to get out from under his car. So he obviously wasn't dead, even if the wheel had landed up on his. But that was a hell of a coincidence, actually, because Max had that botched pit stop, and then he exits the pit lane at exactly the same time that Lewis is passing through, and you're just like, really, they're just magnetized to each other. But then Lewis had a dodgy race in Turkey as well. Max Portimao early on. Max made a couple of errors that gave Lewis the lead, but even then Lewis was faster. Jeddah by this point, but by the end of the season, they put that new engine in Hamilton that just made the car so much faster, and Jeddah was just a joke of a race. So, I could do a proper assessment at some point, but Lewis cost himself so many more points than Verstappen did, and he benefited from penalties far more than Verstappen did. So it was the way they had to make it close was basically to benefit Lewis and to keep the title close, because in normal conditions Verstappen should have won it by like 50 or 60 points.
No.
And they somehow managed to manipulate it basically to go down. And like Lewis said in the final sector after failing to pass Max, this race has been manipulated. It's like, yes, it has, to keep it as close as possible. Because even before the weekend started, I was thinking somehow this is going to go down to the last lap. Even though it's Abu Dhabi, I can just picture it, and then it did.
No, there's on Monza especially, that incident, I don't think I see that incident the same way the stewards saw it, because Max probably should have been given more space by Lewis, and Lewis knew that Max was there, and the sausage curb, of course. Yeah, I mean, we could launch this into a whole conversation about those goddamn sausage curbs, which are just so damn dangerous, and that shouldn't have been there. And that would then one car would have never ended up on top of the other. I mean, I guess they would have just ended up crashing into each other, but like not as dangerously, I suppose, because the side impact structure is like way safer than having a tire on your head, and which could, yeah, that could have gone way differently. But I see Monza more as like a 50-50 thing. Yeah, you could really tell that by the end of the season, Max was starting to get desperate. I think in Jeddah that race, okay, Lewis had more pace, but Max was putting up one hell of a fight in Jeddah. Like I think there were so many. I think there were like two restarts of that race or something due to red flags or safety cars or something. I don't remember the specifics. And yeah, Jeddah was a whole can of worms because Max took the position off like gained an advantage or something, or pushed Lewis off, got a penalty for that, then gave the position back, but they weren't satisfied with that because he did it in a way that he could regain it right away under the DRS zone, which I don't even know if there's a regulation against that. Is there? I don't know. And then Max got another penalty for that because, well, he didn't do it properly. And then, of course, he tried to give back the position to Lewis. He pulled over to the side. He did brake, about 1/3 brake power. Some people say it was a brake test. Some people say it wasn't. I don't know. There's lots that can be discussed there, and many options. And Lewis didn't take the position. He pulled over to the side with Max and slowed down as well, and then ran into the back of Max. And come on, guys, like get it together. Yeah, this was obviously another game for Max for the DRS line. Obviously, like we saw these games of chicken a few times at that race, and we saw it like the next season immediately with Leclerc and Max at Bahrain at the start of the year. Like this is nothing like groundbreaking or new or shocking or anything. Come on, guys, you can't just run into each other like that. Like Hamilton should have never been that close behind Max, pulled over off the racing line, and been able to make that crash happen. Not in a position to have that happen, and Max probably shouldn't have braked as hard. By that point, he probably should have noticed, okay, this game of chicken for the DRS line is not gonna work out for me because I'm too fast. Lewis is slowing down with me, and the only way I'm gonna make the DRS line behind Lewis is if I brake now and he pulls over. And by that point, it's gonna be so much braking action that it's gonna turn into into a brake check, I guess, in the eyes of the stewards. And then, of course, yeah, the whole Abu Dhabi thing. Definitely a very memorable race. Is it going to be the most remembered race of all time? Like you indicated at some point or something along those lines. I think there's a few more, even more notorious races, but this is definitely way up there. Naf?
I just remember Jeddah. For so long, I thought Verstappen and Hamilton are going to wipe themselves out of the race, and Ocon is going to win a second race in 2021, which is absolutely absurd, thanks to the two not being there. That's what I kept thinking during that race. Obviously, Ocon didn't even finish on the podium at the end, but I was convinced Ocon would somehow win that race. Anyway, going back to Abu Dhabi, I think it's time to do the race rankings. So, Peter, who was your top three of the race?
Checo definitely the best. And then I guess Max and Tsunoda. Because obviously Tsunoda got that that's P4. Checo does his Minister of Defense job, and Max did what he needed to do to be to win the title, even with the machinery not on his side.
Yeah, I mean it's hard to argue against that because Tsunoda had the best race of his season, and yeah, well, Max did enough. I guess Sergio would have to be there for his defense.
Yeah, because otherwise the rest of the grid, it was a very quiet race, to be honest. I mean, the people that were didn't the ones that unlapped themselves and the ones that didn't. I know that Stroll complained a bit, but you think like how much was going on with them, like Vettel and that, and Ferrari were there or thereabouts. Because this is the thing. This is somehow we've got a whole podcast and not mentioned Ferrari once. Because Sainz finished third, and he was actually quite close behind Max and Lewis. And I was thinking, I wonder if he feels like he could really have a go at them on the final lap if he'd been a little bit closer. But McLaren, Ricardo, I think, was one of the ones that got to unlap himself. They'd gone. They were still, obviously at this point, they were still reading from the effects of Sochi, because that race kind of broke them, and it broke Lewis, Lando, and I think it's still broken him. They haven't really recovered, and they were just kind of invisible in those last few races, and they lost their battle for third with Ferrari. But the rest of the grid was just kind of invisible. There was very little else going on because it was a standard Abu Dhabi race where nothing much happens if there's not a title at stake.
I feel like there was an unwritten rule from the other drivers to not interfere with Verstappen and Hamilton in any way, because Sainz, I kept thinking, yeah, he could do something there. Imagine if he does, and then in the end, he's just like waiting behind. Because just can you imagine if Sainz dive bombs Verstappen? I think that would have been
His ex-Toro Rosso teammate. Yeah, let's take his title away from him. Yeah.
Yeah, like Sainz just being like, yeah, why not? And not realizing that the title is at play. This could have been incredibly interesting because it could have happened. If Verstappen has a bad exit from the last turn, from the final turn, and Sainz has a good run, they could have been a move anyway. It didn't happen, but if Sainz dive bombs Verstappen and Hamilton is champion, Sainz gets honorary British citizenship or something, I'm sure. Then my top three of the race was Perez, Tsunoda, and the thing is, Max, I don't want to put him in my top three, genuinely. I would put Lewis, which is incredible, but Lewis had a fantastic race. So yeah. What was your top three again?
For me, it's Perez, Tsunoda, and Verstappen. Because Lewis, he got the lead at the start because Verstappen messed it up. He then didn't get penalised for cutting the corner. Somehow, in 2 laps, couldn't pass Checo on brand new tyres when Checo was on old ones. And then, was left in the position, and this is a mixture of him and the pit wall of not having the tyres they needed to fortify his position at the end. Though, whereas Max, he did what he needed to do on the final lap and what he could do with the weapons at his disposal. But otherwise, Lewis just drove his race at leading from the front, more or less.
Okay. What about your top three, Con?
My top three of the race, I would probably say I wanna go out there a bit because I think Mick Schumacher deserves a mention to some degree, just for being able to challenge the Williams in this race on pure pace and for running that well, I suppose. Top three, probably not, but I still want to give him a shout out. So who else would there be? Of course, I think Max Verstappen for sure, just for pushing through that cramp, getting it done on the final lap, and never giving up through the whole thing. Like it was hopeless in between. It seemed very hopeless in between, and I don't know. He still managed to get it done and get the title and deliver a drive in an underwhelming car by that point. And he also got the pole position. Let's not forget. So there's that. Perez, for sure. This was probably one of the best races I ever saw from Perez. Just that tire management, not just like doing 21 laps on the soft. That's one thing. Like that's the longest softs that anyone did during that race. But having enough soft tire left by the end to still push back against Lewis, that was the impressive part. Because, like, you only have that much tire left if you've saved it for that purpose, and that would have meant that had he not expanded on Lewis, he would have been able to do another few laps on those softs, like just lapping regularly instead of doing this whole mental push to get past Lewis and dive bomb him and back him up and all that. So I guess backing up Lewis meant that he was lapping a bit slower for a while there. So there's Verstappen, Perez, and let's go for Tsunoda, to be honest. Yeah, Tsunoda had a great race, especially overtaking Bottas at the end there in the Mercedes. That should have never happened. Bottas should have been ashamed for his performance that race. Like, yeah, this wasn't the worst season Bottas ever had, and Bottas' role was crucial in getting Mercedes that constructors title in the end. But Bottas wasn't really a great driver that year either. Like he had seen better years, 2017 for sure. That's the big standout, of
Well,
course. We challenged for title
the
for a
fact
while.
that was the fact that was Bottas's final race, and it ends with Yuki overtaking him. It's like the worst send off he could have had from
Yeah,
Mercedes.
for sure.
They would
But
have
yeah,
been very
going on
poetic
to
if it was
the
Russell overtaking him.
oh yeah, imagine. Well, going on to the flop of the race, I'm not sure. Well, now you talked about Bottas, I'm considering him. Latifi is an obvious one because he's fighting with Mick when his car is like a few tenths faster than the Haas per lap. Um, you know what? I let myself be convinced by your choices. Who were your flops? Who was your flop of the race, Con?
My flop of the race. I'm probably gonna go for the Sauber Alfa Romeo team instead of any particular driver because like Latifi is the obvious one, but that double DNF for Sauber, they knew the car had issues. Kimi had told them in the technical debriefs earlier. They completely failed to maximize the potential of the car all season. They failed to develop it. They failed to actually use that the development driver they had. Yeah, I don't know. Sauber just were completely underwhelming once again. So I guess that's my pick, but that's probably more of a pick for the whole season, for of the season, Sauber. But still for that race as well, because it was like the nail in the coffin, especially with both drivers departing. Like you couldn't have failed them at any worse moment. Peter?
My first instant again for flop is Bottas for just being invisible and not being there to help Lewis at all. Another nominee would be whoever the head of Mercedes strategy was for pitting Lewis in a way that means he gets stuck behind Perez, and then for not pitting at the end or not taking the chance to pit. That would and it was a very conservative because he went medium hard on a one stop. That's a very conservative strategy to try as well. So maybe just the Mercedes pit wall. And for Toto for all of the stuff he was saying all race and manipulating safety cars and
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's fair. Well, for the sake of being complete, then I'll just say Latifi for the obvious one, which is he shouldn't have been fighting with Haas in the first place, and then try to finish the season well. Don't just crush, and then cause one of the biggest controversies in the sports history. So I think that rounds it up well. And then rating the race, I would go for 4 stars because the race itself was underwhelming apart from that Hamilton Perez little squabble, but it gave us one of the most memorable races of all time. There's not much else to say, so I would give it 4 stars.
Yeah. Looking at the big picture, I'm giving it 5 just for the significance of it and particularly the last lap as well.
Well, I would give it. What would I give it? It's probably going to be a 4.5 out of 5 because Nav is right that there's not that much that happened in the race apart from the key moments that we discussed, and most of that was just down to Lewis and Max at the start and at the end, and then that short bit of Paris in the end, in between, and of course Latifi, Mick Schumacher, the Sauber retirement, Russell retirement, but we didn't really get to see any like other great overtaking in between. So it's gonna have to be a 4.5 out of me. Not great, not terrible.
Right. I think it's time for the DRS rankings. So what have we got today? So for driver, Pascal Wehrlein, somebody who, well, he was a Mercedes junior, came to F1 from DTM, a year with Manor, a year with Sauber, a contender certainly for Rosberg's replacement, which instead went to Bottas, and now he's in Formula E. So just someone who, his F1 career is basically cut short.
Yeah, definitely. I have very strong thoughts on Verlaine. If you've been listening to this podcast for a while, you'll know that I was a big Verlaine fan, and he was unfairly treated at Sauber because of Marcus Ericsson being his teammate. Felipe Nasser also complained about it later on. At Manor, getting a point in that car was utterly insane. I don't think people realize how mid that 2016 Manor was. So finishing 10th in Austria was incredible. And yeah, there's a video that you can find at the end of 2016 where he gets an award at the 2016 Autosport Awards for best rookie or best something of the year. And he gets asked about that Mercedes seat. And Verlaine, being as confident as he is, having won the 2015 DTM title as a very young driver in a field of very old drivers, experienced drivers, he just says, yeah, of course, I want that seat. If Toto's listening, I want that seat. It's still being assessed. So he's not going for a very PR friendly answer. He's going for the I want that 2017 Mercedes seat. At that time, there were three drivers in contention: Bottas, Verlaine, and Alonso. Alonso was ruled out very quickly because Toto did not want to deal with another silver war situation. Verlaine was quite honestly and quite factually a bit inexperienced at that point, only one season in Formula One. But I keep thinking, if he had gotten that seat, where would he be right now? How would 2017 and 2018 have gone? I think he would have gotten a win at least. Somewhere he would have gotten a win or two. And yeah, I think he was extremely unfairly treated due to having Marcus Ericsson as his teammate. Going back to that, Ericsson was said to have had a lot of influence through his sponsors at Sauber. Felipe Nasser also complained about it, as I said. Verlaine left the sport at the end of 2017, despite again having scored the only points that Sauber scored that year. So I would rate him as high as B. This is me being biased, but seeing what we saw of him in Formula One, generally he should be C. I would say B just because it's me, because I think he had a lot to give to Formula One. Obviously, in Formula E, he hasn't been great, but any other driver who scored 5 points in back markers would have had more of a chance.
Yeah, I think B is fair because he's someone who he only got 2 seasons in F1. You can compare him to, obviously the circumstances are different. People like Jules Bianchi, or going back even further, Stefan Beloff, or even Mike Thackwell, young drivers who had a lot of promise and there was a lot of hype around them and they did well, but there were lots of setbacks even just in their own F1 careers, and then their careers were cut short either by death or by other circumstances or whatever. If he'd gone to Mercedes in 2017, I mean, that would have been a gigantic leap from Manor. I think he would have been better.
And from DTM before.
Yeah.
It would have been DTM Manor Mercedes F1 team.
Yes. I don't think he would have been as dependable as Bottas, who you could expect to kind of middle it and just be safe. But he would have had the occasional breakout moments where he was challenging Lewis harder, or winning races, and that it would have been very interesting to see someone advance up so quickly. But it depends how much, particularly if you take that he was maybe had a bit of an ego, how much he wanted to just be the second driver to Lewis is the thing. It would have been interesting because I've always said, if Rosberg never retired, Vettel would have 6 titles, and maybe Verlaine, if he felt confident enough in himself, would have basically gifted Vettel his Race of Champions partner. Let's not forget 2 extra titles.
You could make an argument maybe for or a point for Verlaine potentially going to Williams, and then Massa wouldn't have had to extend if I got the years right, and because Bottas was, of course, no longer there.
Yeah.
Why didn't that happen?
That's the one,
that should have happened.
Because Verlaine to Mercedes directly doesn't make any sense because he wasn't prepared for that. But he should have gone to Williams. Like, okay, Stroll, okay.
Makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot.
sure went there. But then Massa wanted to retire. Why didn't they let him? Because this guy had proven that he deserved to be there, didn't he?
Yeah, they should have
Because
done.
I'm not sure if
Yeah.
Massa wanted. Because I know that the story is that they called Massa again, but something tells me that Massa also, for some reason, wanted another season. Because yeah, I hadn't thought about that, but that would have been perfect. The other obvious one is, of course, that Ocon. I forgot to say that Ocon got the 2017 Force India seat, which to me never made sense. I know that some underlying base thingy suggests that Ocon was a bit faster than Wehrlein at Manor by like, half a tenth per lap or something. And that's why also the fact that Ocon is Toto's driver, I think that plays much more than the first fact. But for me, Wehrlein should have been in Force India for 2017 because he had more experience and he had scored the flipping only point of Manor's um, entire time in F1. So yeah, he didn't get that Force India seat. He didn't get that Merc seat. He didn't get Williams, as you pointed out. I never really thought about that. And then he goes to Sauber, and then he's out of the sport. So I think there was a chain of events that must have been extremely frustrating for Verlaine. It went from you might be going to Mercedes. So here you are at Sauber with Ericsson, and here you are out of the sport. And another thing, another nod to Ciaron, who wasn't here today. He always says that Ocon to Red Bull would be a nice move because Ocon is so hot-headed and deluded in some way that he can compete with Verstappen, that he would make it interesting. I think Verlaine could have done the same. I think at some point in 2018, especially, he would have started to like try more, and it would have given us fireworks. As Peter said, it could have led to a Vettel title.
Yeah, nothing to add to that really. I just want to add my ranking. You guys said B tier. I don't know that point for a manner that was really impressive, but does he deserve a B tier ranking? I mean, you guys already both said B tier, so even if I say C tier, which I'm gonna say C tier, it would still go into B, of course, in the final rankings with how it averages out. But yeah, if Peter wants to say anything else about him, but I think I have nothing else to add about Wehrlein.
Yeah, just B tier, just cut short. Should have been around a bit longer. Potentially could still be here because he's doing reasonably well in Formula E.
So next up, we have the track layout, and this time we're going to be doing Yas Marina, the circuit again, Abu Dhabi, but the layout pre-2021, which means both chicanes are still in there, the one around turn 5 and the one around what is now turn 11, if I remember correctly. And yeah, what do we think of this old track layout, guys? Nav.
I'll start by saying it's atrocious because that's why Alonso didn't win the 2010 title, because it was incredibly hard to overtake at. It basically, okay, it wasn't just that, it was mostly Valencia 2009, but it reinforced the view that in 2011 DRS should be implemented. I think in 2009 as well, there were very few overtakes at Yas Marina. If not, I think there were 2 overtakes, and Valencia had none on track. So yes, this truck is one of the big reasons why DRS got implemented, which says a lot. Obviously now the truck is better, I would say. But back then, very few overtakes, and that was horrendous for a season finale. You want the season finale to be fun. You want it to be have a good quali, have a good race. Maybe some rain comes into play. I think I'm just talking about Interlagos, obviously. Interlagos is so perfect to be a season finale, and we are stuck with Yas Marina for a few years now. So the previous layout, D, it's nice because the sun sets at the end of the season, which is nice. But apart from that, it's such a. I would have put F, but I will say D.
I mean, I agree with you that the season finale should be in Sao Paulo, but F1 appears to be going for ending the season in Vegas with what it looks like, because they're trying to do Vegas very late in the season. They are looking at that 10-year deal. They're probably not looking to extend the deal with Abu Dhabi to be the season finale, and ending the season in Vegas would probably be like a very big show for them. And yeah. So that's just my comment on that. And in terms of ranking the track prior to the changes for 2021's race, yeah, D tier is probably fair. Like it has never produced brilliant races outside of, well, I wouldn't call 2021 brilliant from a racing standpoint, but it was certainly not a bad race overall. But that old layout, I never liked it much, to be honest. Yeah, I'm just gonna say D tier. Peter, what do you think?
I mean, my opinions on this are similar to the ones I said about the current layout in the last podcast. That I like aesthetically, I quite like it because it has that symbolic look of the sun setting on the season by being at the end of the day to night transition. I
Yeah.
like that it has this kind of stadium effect. It has this stadium look, but it's kind of open at the same time. So even though it's because it's got the large grandstand surrounding it, it feels enclosed. It still feels like you're going somewhere. Like each sector feels like it's quite apart from everything else, and also you have the sort of tunnel going under the hotel and all of that. So it feels like you're going somewhere rather than just it's staying all in the same place. But this one, it is a worse layout. I'm never a fan of track layouts changing because it means you can't compare current cars to old cars in terms of lap times. But yeah, this one, the two chicanes, they just kind of kill the rhythm a bit more than the current layout.
Yeah.
I think it has the aesthetics down, and I think there's something that the circuit is quite varied, at least aside from no elevation change. So I think a C for me.
Well, that's still 2 votes for D, so it's gonna end up in D anyway. But fair enough. Yeah, you're completely right about the look of the track and the feel and the whole sun setting over the season. Like from that perspective, yeah, it's a stunning environment and the whole symbolic aspect of it. But I don't think that makes up for the quality of the racing and how bad it is. Like if we were judging it by, well, we can't judge it by 2021 because it's not that layout. But if 21 had taken place on that track, which it couldn't have because turn 5, the new turn 5 became very important, then maybe it would have gotten a C ranking from me for producing a memorable race, but it didn't, and so it doesn't. Yeah.
And last thing is a season finale for me should be sold out and should be brimming with action. I don't think Abu Dhabi sells out, so that's a big issue for me as well.
It did in 21 for obvious reasons. I mean, you see the trackside footage,
Yeah.
but otherwise it doesn't because most people can't afford it. It's too expensive to go out to Dubai, and especially if the race isn't going to be any good.
No.
So then for our car, it's the Sauber C41 or the Alfa Romeo C41, depending on how you want to label this team that seem to have a perpetual identity crisis. So Giovinazzi and Raikkonen's car, last car for both of them, race with not the best. I mean, it was they had 2019 was a very good year for them, but then it really kind of plummeted. Picked up in 22, but 2020 and 21 were not brilliant. And this was this car gave them 9th in the standings, so really not their best work.
Yeah, well, I really don't have much to say about that car. It was just forgettable. It was nice because Kimi was doing some interesting things with it from time to time, getting a few points and just being Kimi and being a good driver with it. But there wasn't much going on. There was not a lot of improvement. As Con said, usually a team who has Kimi improves throughout the season. That didn't happen. So yeah, it's a D for me, and it's just hard to remember them. They had a nice livery. I remember them for that, but other than that, no.
Yeah, I was gonna say if we were ranking by the livery alone, it would be S tier because that I think for
Yeah.
me that was the most gorgeous livery that year, especially the special Monza livery with the green. That's probably my favorite Sauber livery ever. Probably one of my favorite liveries ever. Period. Like maybe the West McLaren trumps it, and the 2015 or 2016 Force India, the one that looks like it's what McLaren should look like, basically. There was that one Force India where it was like a orange, silver, black. It looked like a combination of the Papaya McLaren and the West McLaren. That was a gorgeous. That was a really gorgeous Force India car. But in terms of on track, what he said that Kimi performed well in it. He didn't perform as well in the 2021 car as he did in the 2020 car. Like in the 2020 car, he had like
Yeah.
Portugal was the standout moment, and not just the first lap. People tend to forget that in Portugal, he also had that lengthy battle with Sainz over a few laps in the middle of the race, which was some brilliant wheel-to-wheel racing. They were battling side by side for the better part of a few laps, and that was great. Like, it wasn't just the first lap that Kimi was great that race. Of course, the car wasn't competitive enough to actually, like, make it to any significant precision at the end. But that first lap was brilliant. But in 2021, Kimi made a lot more mistakes. Like he had that needless contact with Giovinazzi in Portugal, and he overtook a car after, like, I don't know, there was one race where he finished P8, but then he got a penalty and they put it down to P11 or something like that, because he had overtaken a car under the safety car or something, if I remember correctly, after having gone off track and losing position. If my memory serves me right. Yeah, I said earlier, considering what Fred Vasseur said about the car, that there's more to come from our car this season, and yeah, no, there wasn't. It wasn't a great car. It underdelivered. It wasn't exactly better than the Williams all that much. It was slightly faster, and it had a slightly bigger operating window, but operationally the team was just worse than Williams because their strategies were just abysmal. And then there was that super long pit stop for Giovinazzi where they had the punctured tire and noticed it way too late, and yeah, the team messed up way too late. But that's not exactly what the car was. So for ranking the car, yeah, I'm just gonna have to say D tier as well. Long-winded answer, but short conclusion, D tier.
Yeah, as it was occasionally okay, I guess I could just about scrape C tier on the basis it didn't break down that often because the modern cars don't. But yeah, very forgettable car. I mean, a lot of the modern cars, a lot of them, they don't have much distinctive in terms of engineering elements or anything. Yeah, there's not a huge amount to say about it. So yeah, a low C.
I can see the C tier because, like, in the grand scheme of things, there's probably it's gonna end up being one of the higher ranked D tier cars ultimately. But yeah, I think this concludes the DRS ranking. So
Yeah, I think that brings this episode to a close. I mean, Abu Dhabi 21. It's it's a divisive, controversial topic, but I think a couple of years have passed. Things have settled down. I mean, it's time for people to start reflecting on it again. I mean, Lewis, well, he claims that he's over it and he's just looking forwards now to what happens in the future. Toto apparently hasn't got over it yet, but I think everyone else has recovered. As everyone says on Twitter, it's almost 2024.
And I think that the fan base has to move on as well. Twitter has to move on. Calling Verstappen a two-time world champion is not going to do anything. So just, accept it.
Toto has, and yeah, we didn't talk about this at all yet, but Toto entering his like main antagonist emo era afterwards with that turtleneck, with a video in the black turtleneck, and like, we're still not over this. That was an iconic moment that also was produced by Abu Dhabi 2021. So on that subject, if you're mentioning Toto's still not over it, yeah, that was a big moment there as well.
He turned heel, and as we've seen with this recent allegations of what conflict of interest with Susie, there, I think he may be getting himself in more controversy to come.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was a good episode. Thank you as ever to Con for stepping in for Ciaron and to Nav. You've been listening to the DRS Train podcast. You can find us on YouTube and Spotify, and we're on Instagram and X at the DRS Train podcast. Stay safe, and we'll see you all next time.